Where to start? I must say the debate so far, speaking as someone who's worked and studied in this area since I was 17, the debate so far this evening has been incredibly difficult to listen to. When we have the chair of a committee talking about the sole purpose of a river is to drain water away from farmland, I do wonder whether we need an ecological education programme within the houses itself. I think we heard from a number of parties this evening, and I do want to specifically refer to Sinn Féin because that contribution today was also very, very difficult to listen to. We heard members talk about how nature loss and biodiversity crisis is the greatest challenge that humanity faces, and action is needed, and yet they voted against a voluntary programme that is designed to protect nature and to restore nature, and I just cannot fathom how that position was come upon, and indeed the fact that the Citizens' Assembly on Biodiversity Loss, their recommendations were used to defend that action, I think is particularly hard to comprehend. To be clear, the Social Democrats are very supportive of the nature restoration law. It is absolutely vital to stymieing the destruction that we're seeing in nature at the moment and for previous decades, and it is important that any measures that are taken are done collaboratively, in consultation with communities, but also they have to be taken quickly. We do not have time to wait. Nature does not have time to wait. And I think, Minister, that is my principal concern about this, is that there is a 2-year period, and I understand why that is necessary. But what I do not want to see is that any action in relation to biodiversity that we're currently undertaking or proposing, that is stalled whilst that 2-year process happens, because we cannot afford for that to be the case. I do also, you spoke earlier on, Minister, about how we were to have a constructive and honest debate today, and I absolutely agree. And I think whilst we can be critical of other members in the chamber, I think obviously you and your government are the ones that have and hold the power when it comes to nature restoration at the moment. And I do want to bring a level of a reality check into the debate as well. The major, I suppose, initiatives and successes that the government has seen to date, I think, could be summarised in my perspective as actual baby steps when it comes to the actual crisis we're facing and the need for action and the scope of that action. Whilst I do welcome those baby steps, they are not big enough, they are not quick enough, they're not fast enough, they are not at the scale that we need. So if we look at National Parks and Wildlife Service, I welcome the investment that's been put in that, but that came from a very low bar. They now get a funding of 67.5 million. Compared that to the 95 million that the horse and greyhound industry get in this country. And you can see how we are so out of kilter with our priorities, and you can understand completely how nature is dying around us as we talk. The 3.15 billion Climate and Nature Fund will start in 2026. Capital budget, no ring fencing for nature. That's needed now, and there does need to be allocations set aside for nature. 31 biodiversity officers, absolutely welcome them. But you're talking about 31 staff out of a total number of staff of 31,000 in local authorities across this country. Again, a drop in the ocean. The National Biodiversity Action Plan, there was a lot made of the fact that it is on statutory footing. However, the targets are so obscure that they're not legally enforceable. Many of them are 2030 targets, where we are indeed in a biodiversity crisis now. There was no change to the remit of Cuilcha and Bord na Móna, which I think was the absolute primary missed opportunity when it comes to that biodiversity plan. And I think if you had actually brought that in, I think we would have seen the systems changes that we need to see in this country in order to start addressing nature. And I think your government's once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do that and to turn that tide, unfortunately, I think you failed on that. We're now 4 years into the 5-year term, and those systems changes are not there. One thing that keeps on being spoken about in relation to the nature restoration law is that actually the state could meet its targets out to 2030, 2040 on state land. That will not happen unless you actually change the remit of Cuilche and Bord na Móna so that biodiversity is a key priority of theirs, that it is not just a commercial remit that they have. The solely commercial focus of these entities is absolutely destroying nature as we speak. This is the Cuilche Strategy Engagement Report, where they have the carbon decision tree. So essentially this looks at their peatlands and says what they're going to replant and what they're not going to replant. And this is purely, they choose purely on a yield basis. They don't look at an area and say, A, we shouldn't be replanting on peatland, which is a no, and you agreed with me on that, Minister, that there should be no replanting on peatland. Unfortunately, it didn't get into the National Biodiversity Action Plan. But here Cuilche is saying that that's not a feature for them. They don't review or look at the biodiversity potential of a site. What they look at when they see a piece of peatland, they look and see how much wood can we squeeze out of this and how much profit can we squeeze out of it. And until that is changed, we are not going to see changes in biodiversity that we need to see, and you will not meet your targets under the Nature Restoration Law. In relation to, I'm just going to give you an example, because I think we have, a lot of plans, a lot of proposals, a lot of press releases and nice publicity photos. But the reality on the ground is not reflecting those plans and proposals and the promises and the targets. And I'm just going to use one example, and that's the hen harrier, which is an iconic species. It's the most protected species in Ireland on paper, and it is one of the most studied species. And yet what we see is that from 2015, when there was a breeding population of 108 to 157, to 2022, we're now down to 85 and 106 pairs. It's a decline of a third. It's a 59% decline since 2000. This species will be extinct in 25 years unless we make the changes that are required. And that means making tough decisions when it comes to where Cuilche are planting, how peatlands are being managed. Currently, there's more breeding happening outside special areas of protection for this species than there is within, because of the level of forestation that's in those SPAs. That doesn't make any sense at all. And what I will say to you, Minister, is that this is, when you get this right, you get it right for farmers as well. I listened to Jonathan Blackmore on Morning Ireland, where he talked about his land and how his land was, he used to see it as wasteland. When they were designated as having harrier status, he said it was like the death knell for them, for their family and for their land. But when they went through the process and they learned how valuable their land actually was, that the poor, unproductive land, that actually it was really rich and valuable and very worth fighting for. You could hear the pride in his voice when he spoke about that. So farmers and landowners are doing the heavy lifting when it comes to protecting this species. It is government that is failing. It is government that is overseeing the extinction of this species. They will be extinct in 25 years. And that will be the legacy of the Green Party in government if you don't get this right, if you don't make those changes to Cuilche and Bord na Móna, to the Arterial Drainage Acts, all those different pieces of legislation. If they are not changed to reflect biodiversity and nature and the crisis that we're in, and continue on solely a profit basis, all those other laws, nature restoration law, will mean nothing. We will never meet them. They will just be a target. I think the Birdwatch Ireland, Una Duggan said the government is quietly quitting on this iconic bird. And I think that to hear her say that was such a strong statement, but I think it's important to get it on the record. I don't think that's something you would want as your legacy. And I do ask that regardless of anything else that you get across the line before this government, the term is over, I would ask that you put in the heavy work now, get the Cuilcha, Board Namona, get their remits changed, Minister, because if you want to leave a legacy for nature, that is how you do it. Thank you.
Now, Arashkaji on Realtas, Sean Haughey.